Well, many thanks for joining us. This is Focus on Africa. I'm Wahiga Mwaura. Now, the leaders of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda could be set to meet for the first time since the takeover of the Congolese city of Goma by Rwanda-backed M23 rebels. Now, it's after the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, and the East African Community arranged a joint summit in Tanzania for this Friday and Saturday to try to bring an end to the crisis. Well, in a tweet, Kenyan President William Ruto said that both President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and President Felix Tshisekedi of the DRC would be in attendance. Fighting has largely been concentrated in Goma, capital of the mineral-rich North Kivu province, where over 700 people are now confirmed to have died, with nearly 3,000 injured, prompting fears of a humanitarian crisis. Both Congolese authorities and the United Nations insist that Rwanda is backing the M23, whose fighters say they've captured all of Goma. The M23 is now understood to be advancing towards Bukavu. This is the capital of South Kivu province. Well, the BBC's Paul Njie and his team have managed to gain rare access to rebel-held Goma, with Paul sending in this report on what life there looks like now following the M23's takeover.
The stringent patrol of rebels on the streets of Goma now counts as the new normal. It's the first time the BBC is entering the besieged city since the M23 claimed control of the territory. We only had few hours to document life here because the security situation remains volatile.
So we've crossed the Rwanda DRC border, and driving through Goma town, what I noticed was a buzzing activity, commercial activity. Drivers are going through and people are also walking on the streets as though nothing was happening. But I'm eager to see if this would be the same situation inside Goma itself, where the fighting has been happening over the last week.
In the heart of Goma, there are still signs of fierce fighting between the rebels and Congolese forces. Banks, shops and other services are closed. There is a semblance of peace, but along the streets, the remnants of war.
A few meters away from where I'm standing is the UN base MONUSCO. But here, we can see among things that have been trashed, military fatigues and gear. We don't know the scenes that played on these streets, but one thing is for sure, the residents here do not feel totally safe with scenes like this.
People are afraid because when they burn these military fatigues and ammunition, they can explode and injure people. We request the government that has taken over to remove them from the streets. Inside these heaps of military leftovers, there may be grenades and live ammunition, which can be very dangerous.
This used to be a filling station, but as you can see, everything seems to have been damaged. Over there, I see bullet holes on that bus, and it's reminiscent of the scenes that might have played here. Although they are going about their activities normally, they know that at any time, anything could change.
Over 700 injured people are receiving treatment here. Even on their hospital beds, they still carry memories of how the fighting has deprived them of a normal life.
I was in my house when the shooting started. Suddenly, my hand felt cold, and I realized I had been shot, and I screamed for help. But they continued firing. I came out of the house screaming.
It might be difficult for the threat of violence to disappear anytime soon. So victims of this 30-year conflict can only bank on their hope to stay alive. At least for now. Paul Njie, BBC News, Goma.
Well, to get more on this story, we can speak to that same Paul, who is now in Gisenyi. This is in Rwanda, which is just over the border from DRC. Paul, thanks for staying across this story. I mean, the situation seems to definitely have de-escalated from some of the images we saw last week. But now talk to us about the humanitarian and medical situation and those concerns by Africa CDC about possible disease outbreaks.
Yes, Wahiga, the situation here in Goma remains dire. We are hearing reports about over 700 people killed and close to 3,000 people injured. But right to speak about the cases of spread of diseases according to UN groups. It's believed that about 143 people who were diagnosed, of course, with Mpox have fled the camps where they were quarantined in. Now just about 15 people are left there, and there are fears that diseases like Mpox and cholera would spread beyond Goma into neighboring countries. So the situation still remains dire. There are also concerns about people who still remain dead, people who remain unaccounted for, and this has caused most people, of course, to flee their homes without an idea of where their next destination would be.
Indeed, quite a worrying situation. And then, of course, there's a message from Africa CDC and other UN groups that a ceasefire is needed to be able to get a handle on some of those challenges you've explained. There's this upcoming summit where the presidents of Rwanda and DRC could be meeting. What's the hope like, with those you're speaking to about a ceasefire in the coming days?
Yeah, well, people who have been moving into Gisenyi here on the Rwandan side of the border with the DRC, they just want this conflict to end. And it's believed that this joint summit between the East African and Southern African leaders will help to provide those solutions. But of course, there still remains some doubt because previous attempts to get a ceasefire have yielded little fruits. We recall the attempts by Angola to broker a ceasefire. That was in place, but it was not respected. So people fear that even if a resolution is taken this weekend, it still will not be respected without goodwill.
Paul, if you can very briefly, just speak to us about movement between, for example, Gisenyi and Goma. Are residents able to move easily? Were you able to? How difficult was it for you to access Goma, for example?
Well, it was not that much of a challenge to cross into Goma itself, but what we realized was the fluidity walking into Goma itself. There's life that has returned partially in Goma, and what we've seen is that there are people who are also leaving Goma, entering into Gisenyi freely, but they go through some robust security checks. Sniffer dogs will look through their luggage to ensure that they are indeed legitimate travelers and make sure that they are traveling for good purposes and, of course, not for bad reasons. So what we've seen is that people are crossing on both sides of the border. It's pretty much easy, although the checks are very stringent and robust, but more and more people continue to walk through this border every day.
A fluid situation. Thank you for giving us the latest updates, Paul Njie, and stay safe. Well, as you've heard,